Durk Blocker never expected his childhood to resurface with such force after more than 5 decades of silence. He was only 14 when tragedy struck, but the memories of that night and the years that followed stayed buried deep inside him. Now, at 67, the man once known for his comedy on Brooklyn Nine-Nine is finally pulling back the curtain on what it meant to grow up as the son of Dan Blocker, the gentle giant behind Hoss Cartwright on Bonanza. His words are not bitter, yet they carry the weight of loss, sacrifice, and the strange reality of sharing your father with the entire world. The weight of a name. Dan Blocker's story began long before television fame, and Durk has often said that understanding his father's beginnings is the only way to understand what came after. Born on December 10, 1928, in Dalhart, Texas, Dan entered the world in unforgettable fashion. 14 pounds at birth, the largest baby ever recorded in Bowie County. Even his birth certificate carried an error, marking him as Bobby Dawn instead of Bobby Dan Davis Blocker. His mother, Mary, endured a grueling labor, while his father, Ora Shack Blocker, likely never imagined that his massive son would one day become a household name across America. The family soon settled in O'Donnell, Texas, where life was modest but demanding. Dan grew up in the back of his father's grocery store, hauling sacks of cattle feed, bagging groceries, and learning discipline through hard work. By age 10, he stood 5 feet tall and weighed 105 pounds. At 12, he had grown to 6 feet and 200 pounds, bigger than many grown men. Locals recall how Saturday nights often turned into makeshift boxing matches on Main Street, where the young boy faced opponents nearly twice his age. He never lost. Rumors spread that he once lifted a car off a man trapped beneath it, and whether or not it was true, nobody doubted he had the strength. Yet behind the size was a boy who carried grief. His sister Virginia died of pneumonia at 11 when Dan was only 5. That loss left its mark, one Durk later described as shaping his father's quiet but enduring tenderness. By high school, Dan towered at 6 feet 4 and weighed 275 pounds, his father joking that he was too big to ride and too small to pull a wagon. But what seemed like an obstacle would soon carry him into history. From soldier to actor. In 1946, after finishing at Texas Military Institute, Dan Blocker entered Hardin-Simmons University, where his size made him a natural football player. But when he transferred to Sul Ross State in 1947, a chance job backstage in arsenic and old lace changed everything. Meant only to carry props, he discovered a love for the stage and switched his major from physical education to drama, a surprise to those who thought his future lay in sports. To pay tuition, he worked odd jobs, from bouncing in bars to rodeo work. On stage, though, he revealed a sensitivity and depth that impressed his teachers. He graduated in 1950 with a degree in speech and drama, turning down offers from football teams and boxing promoters. Instead, he went to Boston for summer stock theater, performing weekly for little pay, convinced he had found his calling. But later that year, the Korean War intervened. At 6'4" and over 250 pounds, it took the Army a month to find boots that fit. He trained in Louisiana, then joined F Company of the 45th Division on the Korean front. Nicknamed the Big Gun, he rose quickly to Master Sergeant, enduring 209 days of combat, including the battles of Hill 255 and Hill 200. On Christmas Eve, 1951, his unit was trapped for 10 hours under fire. In May 1952, 6 Americans were killed and 21 wounded. Blocker was shot while rescuing comrades, earning a Purple Heart and other honors. War left him scarred and outspoken against future conflicts like Vietnam. Returning home in September 1952, he married Dolia Lee Parker, the sweetheart who had waited for him. Days later, he re-enrolled at Sul Ross, earning a master's in drama and teaching English and drama in Texas and New Mexico. Students remembered his booming Shakespeare readings and gentle humor. Though he aimed for a Ph.D. in education, Fate soon pulled him toward Hollywood. Hollywood comes calling. Teaching kept food on the table, but Dan never let go of his passion for acting. In the mid-1950s, while on a family trip to California, fate intervened. Wearing cowboy boots, a bright shirt, and a wide straw hat, he stepped into a phone booth on a Los Angeles street. A talent agent spotted him and was struck by his sheer presence. At 6'4" and over 300 pounds, he looked like he had walked straight out of a Western. Without an audition or introduction, the agent knew he belonged on screen. Dan had not gone west to seek stardom. He had moved to Los Angeles in 1956 with the aim of earning a Ph.D. in education at UCLA. To support his wife and 4 young children, twin daughters Deborah and Dana, son David, and youngest son Durk, he worked as a substitute teacher in Glendale. Still, Hollywood began calling. In 1956, he made his television debut in Sheriff of Cochise, playing a bartender. More small roles followed: cavalry officers, outlaws, and strongmen in shows like Gunsmoke, Colt 45, Have Gun, Will Travel, The Rifleman, and Cheyenne. By 1957, he was taking any role that came along, even playing the Goon in a Three Stooges short film, Outer Space Jitters. Credited as Don Blocker, he lumbered around in a space monster costume, the part filmed in just 2 days. It wasn't glamorous, but it was experience. Then came a breakthrough, a guest role on Maverick as Hognose Hughes. The show stood out from other westerns, blending wit and charm with the traditional gunslinger setting. Dan showed not only strength, but also comic timing, and casting directors noticed. The next step was Cimarron City, where he played Carl Tiny Budinger. Though the series lasted only 1 season, it connected him with producer David Dortort. Dortort had seen something in Dan, something beyond brute size. When he began developing a new series in 1959, he knew exactly who he wanted for one of its central roles. That series was Bonanza. NBC was gambling on a new kind of Western, not just action and gunfights, but family drama set against the sprawling Ponderosa Ranch in Nevada. Each Cartwright's son would have his own character traits, and for the middle son, Hoss, Dortort had Dan Blocker in mind. There was no audition. The role was written for him. At first, Bonanza struggled, ranking only 45th in the ratings. Hoss was originally written as comic relief, the big, slow man who could throw a punch but not much else. But Dan refused to play him as dim-witted. He infused Hoss with warmth, intelligence, and humanity. Slowly, the writers adapted to Dan's interpretation, making Hoss the heart of the series. By the 3rd season, the show climbed to number 2 in the ratings. Soon, it was the most watched program in America, airing in nearly 50 countries. And at the center of it all stood Dan Blocker. Fame, family, and the heavy burden. By the mid-1960s, Bonanza wasn't just a successful show, it was a national ritual. Sunday nights at 9 p.m., nearly 19 million households tuned in. From 1964 to 1967, it held the top spot in the ratings, and for 9 straight years it remained in the top 5. Around the world, in countries as distant as Brazil, France, Thailand, and even Saudi Arabia, audiences knew the Cartwright family. And among them, Hoss Cartwright was beloved as the gentle giant, the moral compass, and the soul of the series. But while America adored Hoss, Dan Blocker's own children were left in the shadow of that fame. Durk, now looking back, has spoken candidly about what it meant to share his father with the entire world. Trips to ballparks or fairs became impossible without crowds forming. Fans wanted hugs, handshakes, and photographs, and Dan, gracious to the end, always obliged. For strangers, it was a dream. For his children, it often meant another moment lost with their father. Durk remembers his father once saying that, "If you could take your family to Disneyland and enjoy a ride without being mobbed, you were lucky." For the Blocker family, those moments were rare. At home in the San Fernando Valley, Dan and his wife, Dolphia, tried to keep life as normal as possible for their 4 children. They expanded the house with more bedrooms, a game room, and a swimming pool, but they resisted the pressure to move into Beverly Hills among Hollywood's elite. "If the schools in the valley are good enough for regular kids, they're good enough for mine," Dan insisted. He wasn't interested in privilege. He wanted his children grounded. The family had its routines. Bedtime was strict. By 8 p.m., the children had to be asleep or they were out of what the Blockers jokingly called the 8 o'clock club. Durk recalls that his father left discipline mostly to his mother, preferring to be the soft one, the teddy bear. He called his children a pretty good crew and cherished tucking them into bed, even if exhaustion from filming sometimes made that impossible. Beyond the screen, dreams and regrets. Fame opened doors for Dan Blocker, but it also reminded him of what he had left behind. Long before Bonanza, his true dream had been education. After earning his master's degree in drama, he planned to complete a PhD at UCLA. For a time, he tried to balance classes with filming, but the pace of Bonanza consumed everything. By 1961, his studies were on hold, never to resume. Later in interviews, he admitted that not finishing his doctorate remained one of his deepest regrets. Yet he wasn't idle outside of Bonanza. Dan explored film work, starring in Come Blow Your Horn with Frank Sinatra in 1963, and again alongside Sinatra in Lady in Cement in 1968, where he played a dangerous businessman. He appeared in Something for a Lonely Man in 1968, a heartfelt role as a blacksmith trying to build a community from scratch. And in 1970, he tried his hand at comedy with the Cockeyed Cowboys of Calico County. His range surprised audiences who only knew him as Hoss. There were near misses, too. Stanley Kubrick considered him for the role of Major T.J. King Kong in Dr. Strangelove, the part that rides the atomic bomb in the infamous final scene. His agent turned it down before he had a chance to read the script, a decision that film historians still speculate about. What if Blocker had taken the role remains a question in Hollywood circles. But Dan's ambitions stretched beyond acting. In 1963, he helped found the Bonanza Steakhouse chain, later merged with Ponderosa. Using his fame, he promoted the restaurants, even appearing in ads and attending openings. At its peak, the brand grew to hundreds of locations. Fans trusted Hoss, and if Hoss said the steak was good, people believed it. Still, for all his success, the cost was mounting. Dan was a large man, weighing over 300 pounds through much of his career. The long filming days, the stunts, and the stress strained his health. Privately, he suffered from gallbladder problems. By the early 1970s, those issues became harder to ignore. At the same time, Dan remained grounded in values. He was a free Methodist, a Democrat, and unafraid to speak his mind politically. He supported California Governor Pat Brown in 1966 and later backed presidential candidates Eugene McCarthy and Hubert Humphrey. In an industry where silence was often safer, he took risks by standing up for what he believed. Durk recalls that his father's humility and integrity left a lasting impression. To the public, Hoss Cartwright was a lovable cowboy. To his children, Dan Blocker was the man who tucked them into bed and reminded them to be kind. But Durk also remembers the shadow of exhaustion that hung over his father in those last years, a shadow that hinted at the tragedy to come. The sudden end and the son's legacy. In early 1972, Dan Blocker faced a health battle few knew about. Years of gallbladder trouble had finally reached a point where surgery was unavoidable. On May 13, 1972, he checked into Daniel Freeman Hospital in Los Angeles for what was considered a routine operation. But routine quickly turned tragic. After the procedure, a blood clot traveled to his lungs, causing a pulmonary embolism. At 4:10 a.m., the gentle giant of television was gone. He was only 43. The shock reverberated instantly. News spread across the country within hours, and fans who had welcomed him into their homes every Sunday night were left stunned. For his wife Dolphia and their 4 children, the loss was immeasurable. Durk was just 14. In interviews today, he admits he never truly processed that grief at the time. He locked it away, growing up in silence with the weight of losing not just a father, but a man shared with millions. For Bonanza, the impact was immediate and devastating. The series had been a top-rated show for more than a decade, but without Hoss, it lost its center. Producer Richard Collins admitted, "Just as we personally suffered a loss, so the audience suffered one, too." Ratings collapsed by nearly 40%. NBC canceled the show in late 1972, and its final episode aired on January 16, 1973. As co-star Lorne Greene told his wife, "That's it. It's finished." Dan was buried in Woodman Cemetery in DeKalb, Texas, not far from where his life had begun. His headstone was plain, his resting place humble. Yet across the country, tributes emerged. A bronze bust was unveiled in O'Donnell on July 4, 1973, with the words, "Thanks to film, Hoss Cartwright will live. But all too seldom does the world get to keep a Dan Blocker later. Landmarks like Dan Blocker Beach in Malibu and Dan Blocker Avenue in Nevada ensured his name lived on." For Durk, life after his father's death meant finding his own path. At 16, he appeared on Marcus Welby, M.D., and by 19, he had a regular role on Ba Ba Black Sheep as Lieutenant Jerry Bragg. Through the 1980s and 1990s, he built a steady career with roles in Poltergeist, Starman, MASH, The X-Files, and even 2 Bonanza spin-offs. But it wasn't until 2013 that he became known to a new generation, playing Detective Hitchcock in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, a role that lasted until 2021. Now, at 67, Durk is finally opening up. He recalls the pain of losing his father, the pressure of being Dan Blocker's son, and the strange mix of pride and grief that came with watching reruns of Bonanza. He admits he never chased fame the way his father had stumbled into it. Instead, he sought consistency, becoming a reliable character actor and even writing a children's book, Master and the Little Monk, in 2017. More than anything, he says, he carries his father's values: humility, kindness, and honesty. For millions of viewers, Dan Blocker will always be Hoss Cartwright, the big man with the bigger heart. But for Durk, the story is far more personal. A father lost too soon, a childhood overshadowed by fame, and a lifetime spent trying to honor that legacy. Now, at 67, his decision to finally speak out has given fans a glimpse of the man behind the myth and of the son who still carries his memory. What about you? Do you remember watching Bonanza or hearing stories about Dan Blocker's larger-than-life presence? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more untold stories from Hollywood's past, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss what's coming next.